Martin Luther King Jr. holiday on January 20, 2020 marked the 25th anniversary of the day of service that celebrates the life and legacy of MLK. This year at Wentzville, Missouri, the community celebration of MLK featured keynote speaker Juan Wilson. Juan is currently the coordinator of diversity and awareness for the Fort Zumwalt School District located in O'Fallon, Missouri. There, he implements diversity and awareness training for students and staff, and he also uses the power of video to tell stories, and I encourage you to visit his YouTube channel and the FZiam YouTube channel to see his work. I recorded Juan's speech using my iPhone as I was sitting in the audience, so I apologize in advance for the audio quality, but I hope you can get past that to take in his words. Here's Juan Wilson, recorded live from the Martin Luther King Community Celebration in Wentzville, Missouri.
There was one thing that my kids saw in me today, that I didn't panic, that I was calm. Aside from my grunts, I was calm. And it was a huge reminder of who was watching us, who was looking at us as an example. You know, since I started this job at Fort Zumwalt, my wokeness level is pretty high. So I started seeking more answers about who I am, because you start to think, like, when you are to be the change, how do you do that? When you feel like you don't matter. Recently, my grandpa died, and I went to the funeral, and it was very, very interesting because I read his obituary. My grandpa worked at a meat packing company from 1960 to 1978. 18 years. Never missed a day of work in 18 years. And although that sounds like a huge feat, we think about a black man in the 1960s working. I'm gonna take it a step further. My grandpa was deaf. My grandpa was also mute. He couldn't speak. So we're talking about a black man in 1960 to 1978 not being able to hear or speak, yet he never missed a day of work. And that in itself reminded me of my dad. I remember seeing my dad as a kid and how much he worked and how hard he worked. The most proud moment that I had with him was when he made supervisor for the accounting department at UPS in our city. See, my dad didn't have a college degree. He just worked that hard. And I remember the times in that Kudja house when he would be gone for 24 hours. At least it was to me, because I would have to be in bed before he got home. And I also remember the times where he would sleep for 24 hours because he worked so hard. I remember one day that I finally got tired of him going to work so much. And so right before he went to work, I snuck into his car. I laid in the back seat and I tried to hide under a blanket. My dad gets in the car and without even turning around says, "You know how to package boxes?" I'm like, "Huh? Oh." My dad and I got to have a conversation. But I learned why I worked so hard. The superintendent of my school district asked me, he said, "Juan, why is it so painful for you to take a day off of work?" And I know why. I watched my dad, who watched his grandpa. There comes a moment in our lives sometimes when we're tested and we have trials. Mine came, dads, what is the most difficult thing in the world for us with our children? It's to see them in pain, right? So I have a daughter. When I lived in the Kansas City area, and my mom said, we're going to move you guys out of here because there's nothing to do here but dope and get girls pregnant. And we moved to St. Peter's and had my first baby when I was 19. I was like, well, Mom, you're 1 for 2. I mean, that 500 was the Hall of Fame numbers, right? But I became a dad at a very young age. And I became a dad the only way that I knew how was because I watched my dad. Then I had my second one. My first child was a girl. She was a daddy's girl. But the second was a boy. And Dad, that feeling of pride that we get when we get that boy. It's like, he's going to do everything I did. And he was that. Later on, we finally started taking him to preschool. And it was hard for me to let go and go into preschool because that's my boy. I'm going to teach him everything. I don't need anybody else to teach him anything. I'm going to teach him everything. I got to let him go. So he starts going to preschool, and he was getting headaches at home. And, just like my parents do, he'd get a headache come inside. I'm like, boy, just sit down, take a break, rest, relax. He'll be back outside playing. So he started going to preschool. And one day he got a headache and he started throwing up. And that's when we knew something was wrong. Because it just doesn't happen that often. So we took him to a neurologist, and when I say that they were literally scratching their heads, they were literally scratching their heads in front of us. He passed every neurological test, the fine motor skills, ran in a straight line. And so they told us that he'll be on headache medications for 6 months. And that'll be it. Cool. Get home. He said, hey, we want you to just come in and do some scans just to weigh everything else out. So we did. And the amount of time that it took for them to come back to us while we're still in the hospital, we knew it was abnormal. And so we finally found a nurse. He said, hey, what's going on? We've been here for a while. No one's talked to us. And so she was like, oh, let me go get the neurologist. And so they got the neurologist. Neurologist comes back and says, wait a minute, no one has grabbed you guys yet? I said, no. And he says, we need to have you come in this room. I said, well, we're not going in any room. Just tell us what's going on so we can go. He said, no, I think you guys need to come into this room. And I said, I don't think you understand. I'm not going in any room. You're going to tell me what's going on with my son right now. And that's when they told us they found something. And immediately my heart dropped down into my stomach. You kind of go on autopilot. And luckily, the program that I had programmed inside of me was one of my dad, who was programmed from his dad, and immediately went into hard work mode. They told us they found a small lime-sized tumor in the back of his brain. He was 4 years old. Immediately admitted us into the hospital. Then went home, came back a week and a half later to where they performed a 5.5 hour surgery to remove that tumor. They told us that he was going to have to walk again, learn how to walk again, learn how to talk again. Told us we were going to have to learn how to potty train him again. A week and a half later, he walked out of the hospital on his own. Wow. The crazy part was I could see pieces of me in him, because when we were leaving the hospital, and we're standing in the elevator and you're ready to go down, and there was an older gentleman in the elevator with us, and my son out loud said, "It smelled like old man in here." That's not me, that's your mother. That's not me. A week and a half later, they told us that they found 4 more on his spine. And then I went back into hardworking dad mode. For a year and a half, he endured large doses of chemo and radiation because of the tumors that had formed on his spine were aggressive, and they worked their way up to the brain to where they caused a lot of issues. 17 surgeries later, I remember when he was going through the chemo. He was bald, no eyebrows. I was watching my son fade away. And he was over the toilet throwing up because of what the chemo was doing inside of his body. I'm a mess. I'm crying outside of the bathroom. I'm just watching him. And he turns, in the middle of throwing up, turns. He's 5 years old, looks at me and says, "Dad, what's wrong?" And I'm trying to be the strong, hardworking, protective dad. And I said, "I'm just worried about you. I just want you to not feel sick." He turns and looks at me and says, a 5-year-old wearing a diaper, you can see his ribs, you can see the bones in his neck, turns and looks at me and says, "Don't be sad, Dad. Jesus wants me to get better." I was a hot mess after that. But I started to think, who is this? How did he get this way? And then I start to think, like, how am I around my son? How am I, when I'm not paying attention to him paying attention to me? You know, and I always have to make sure I at the very end and tell people my son is still alive. He is 10 years in remission. But there are a lot of long-term permanent effects. Does anybody in here that has either faced cancer or has had a family member that has faced cancer knows that's not cancer that does the damage? It's the radiation and chemo. He's almost lost all of his hearing. He developed cataracts that had to be cut out. But the crazy thing is whenever he would go to the hospital, to the doctor, and they would have to access his port, because they have this thing that they have to give blood return first before they administer the medications. And at 6, 7 years old, he's looking at the doctor saying, "Why is there no blood return?" That's your mother again. That's not me. I know. How can we be the change? When I talk in schools, I always tell people, model the behavior. You want to see the world change? Then act the way that you want the world to be. Because kids are watching. And I say it out loud, and I say it proudly, us adults, we screw it up. The kids know what to do. They got it. But we as adults, we screw it up. Because we're not modeling the behavior. We're not being the change that we want to see in the world or that we want to see in our kids. That's my challenge for everyone here. Make sure that you shut the water off in your house before you change the dishwasher. But I want you to find a moment in your life. I want you to look in the mirror and ask yourself, who am I? Am I being the example that I want the person next to me to be? And am I the example that I want my kids to be? Because we're so used and so comfortable to saying someone else, the work that Dr. King did, that was amazing. He was a change agent. And so we want to see that in the world, but we're not willing to do it ourselves. And a lot of times we're afraid to do it because we don't know what that looks like. We automatically think that it's a peaceful protest, a walk down Washington or in North St. Louis. when it's sometimes the person next to you, when they say something that shows their biases, is correcting them. That's how you create change. That's what we have to do. We have to figure out our way with our skill set and with who we are and what's within us to affect change. I'm extremely proud of the young people that are here. Because easily at night, you guys were off school today, weren't you? They're off school, they don't have to be here. But yet, society has put a stigma on them that they're lazy, that they don't work hard. What do you think that makes young people do when you tell them that? I'm going to end this with a story, because if we want to be the change we have to be it. When I was in high school, I graduated from Fort Zumwalt High School in 1999. And at that time, I was probably one of maybe 10 black students total in the entire school. And I had a teacher who, at the end of every test, gave us 4 bonus questions. Bonus, I'm always excited. But this time I wasn't. Because the bonus questions were over the show Friends. I'm not saying Friends is a bad show. We just didn't watch it at my house. And so we get to the bonus questions, and I listened to them, and I wouldn't know any of them because we didn't watch that in our house. To the point to where once I got to the bonus questions, I immediately put my pencil down and didn't even try. Then it went on so long that it started to affect my confidence in the questions just in the test. Because I knew that the bonus questions were coming and I had no chance unless I did something that I wasn't interested in or enjoyed. I was very, very quiet. My parents taught me, speak when you're spoken to, and that's it. And so I don't know what happened to me. Maybe I should have been on medication that day and I wasn't. But out loud after one of the quizzes, I said, my teacher was Mr. Primo. I said, Mr. Primo, these bonus questions aren't meeting my cultural needs. Mr. Primo said, okay, Juan, what questions would? I said, huh? You heard that? Because he knows my mom. He is not afraid to tell my mom something that I said. And I was like, oh, you heard that? He was like, no, seriously, what questions would meet your cultural needs? I said, I don't know. He goes, what shows do you watch at home with your family? And I was like, Martin. He goes, you watch Living Single too? Mr. Primo, you know it. You watch Living Single too? He said, all right, I'll see what I can do. So the next test came. Wasn't excited about it at all. Got through it, bonus questions, put the pencil down. He said, all right, question number 1. In the episode of Martin, when Martin, I was like, hold up. Yes, I'm here. Those 4 bonus questions were over the shows Martin and Living Single. I got so excited after I answered all of those to the point to where I went back up to the regular question and said, wait a minute, I think I got this one wrong. I remember this now. My confidence immediately started to grow. What do you think my classmates around me did? What is this? Mr. Primo, this isn't fair. And he asked, okay, well, what's not fair about it? We don't watch any of these shows, so how are we supposed to know these answers? And what he said that day was so profound, I will never forget it to this day. He said, now you guys know how Juan has felt this entire time in this classroom. I suggest you start watching that show. I was the only black student in that class. And somehow he found a way to be a change agent and be the change in a classroom for a black student who didn't feel welcomed, who didn't feel accepted through the skill set that he had. He didn't have to go out in the middle of Mexico Road and march and march and say that black people should have the same rights that everybody else has. He has found a way to reach me where I was at, using the skill set that he had. And that's what my challenge for you all today would be when you go home. So if people in here live together and you see the other person looking in the mirror saying, "Who are you?" Like, don't think they're crazy. I seriously want you to look in the mirror and ask yourself, who am I? And do that every single day. Ask yourself, how am I going to affect change in the area that I'm at? Whether you work for Monsanto, whether you work for McDonald's, it doesn't matter. Ask yourself, how are you going to be the change agent where you're at?